Electoral integrity is a word we hear around a lot nowadays. Let's explore. With Lok Sabha elections going on, we often hear the word electoral integrity used in newspapers, TV news channels talk about it. Today, we'll explore what the phrase electoral integrity means. We'll explore the meaning of the word electoral integrity, how it's violated. That's what we'll explore today. The term electoral integrity is difficult to define. In fact, there's no common definition. Scholars disagree on the definition of the word electoral integrity. But today's session is not one of the scholarly debates. Today's session is about understanding what electoral integrity means. So I'll keep it very simple. In simple words, electoral integrity means strict adherence to moral principles, strict adherence to values by all those people involved in the election process. It can be election administrators, it can be candidates, it can be government in power, it can be the media, and most importantly, by the voters. The objective of electoral integrity is to ensure that election process is not rife with malpractices, is to ensure that sanctity of elections are maintained. Because elections are the key to democracy. In the term electoral integrity, the key word happens to be integrity. The word integrity literally means wholesome, pure. So that means any practice that destroys the wholeness or any activity that destroys the purity, that means integrity is violated. To make it simple, we'll understand electoral integrity much better if you understand what are the practices that destroys integrity. The best way to understand electoral integrity is to understand the electoral malpractices. And I'll be using a scholar here, Sara Birch. She wrote a book, Electoral Malpractices. And this is how she defines an electoral malpractice: the manipulation of electoral processes and outcomes so as to substitute personal or partisan benefit for the public interest. The key word here is manipulation. The key word here is manipulation of outcomes, manipulation of electoral processes. If you go by Sara Birch's definition of electoral malpractice, what she's trying to point out here is even a smallest malpractice that creeps into electoral process destroys not only the sanctity of the election process but also destroys the integrity of it. By destroying the integrity of the whole electoral process, the malpractices make the whole elections unfair and partisan. And speaking of unfair and partisan, it is the free and fair election that's a cornerstone for electoral integrity. So let's understand what is this free and fair elections. Free and fair elections is a term every school kid in India is introduced to because they study in social sciences, free and fair elections. What does the word free mean here then? So here free means in Kantian terms, it means autonomy. It means freedom to make choice. It means free from coercion. That is, nobody is forcing you. You have absolute freedom to make your own choices. Now that's what free here is. Free means that all those entitled to vote have the right to be registered and to vote and must be free to make their own choice. That's the first meaning of the word free. An election is considered free when you can decide whether or not to vote and vote freely for the candidate or party of your choice without fear and intimidation. This is what is absence of coercion. Let's come to the third element of free. A free election is also one where you're confident that who you vote for remains your secret. This is what we call secret ballot. We explored the word free. Let's look at the word fair. Fair means non-partisan. Fair means impartial. And what are the elements that makes the electoral process fair? The first element of fair means that all registered political parties have an equal right to contest the elections, campaign for voter support, and hold meetings and rallies. This gives them a fair chance to convince voters to vote for them. Let's look at the second element. Second element of fair is a fair election is also one in which all votes are counted and where the announced results reflect the actual vote totals. Now that we have understood the meaning of the word free and fair, let's understand what makes an election free and fair. In fact, there are 8 standards, and these are the 8 standards that makes an election free and fair. And these standards are spread across the entire electoral process, before, during, and after voting. The first standard that ensures free and fair elections starts before voting. And this standard enables a citizen to register as a voter. In fact, for an election to be free and fair, maximum number of citizens should be allowed to vote. And allowing voting depends on registration as a voter. Now, governments in power can restrict citizens from registering as voters. They can place restrictions in terms of age. They can place restrictions in terms of residency. They can place restrictions in terms of citizenship status. Not placing these restrictions allows the citizens to register as voters. The biggest threat to the standard is the presence of fake voter ID cards, is the presence of fake registered voters. And even the recent elections, if you've been reading newspapers, constantly there have been allegations coming out of fake voter IDs, fake registered voters. So the first threat to electoral integrity is this only. The second standard that makes an election fair is information. The registered voter should have reliable information about the candidates so that they can make the right choice. Now, this is where information becomes crucial. This is where availability of reliable information, the word is reliable, trustworthy information, not misinformation. Only if reliable information is available, a voter can make a fair choice who to vote for. Now, this is where governments can create a level playing field. Government should allow the media channels, the state media channels, the news agencies to give reliable information out. The information should not be doctored. Now, if you look at recent times, this election itself, if you see newspapers, it's full of stories where social media was being misused to spread misinformation. You can see AI being misused. You can see deep fakes being created. So all this violates the second standard. Citizens should have the right to run for office. Eligible citizens. This is a third standard that makes elections free and fair. How this works is, for an election to be democratic, the voter should have choices. Voters should have options in front of them. So that means the more the number of candidates, voter has more choices. Recently, Cambodian Senate elections and Bangladesh elections had this big issue of mass arrests of candidates or banning of political parties, intimidation of candidates who were standing in election. Now, this kind of behavior by the government in power destroys the very essence of free and fair elections. The next and the most important standard which contributes the maximum to make an election free and fair is the voter should have access to polling place or a method of voting. If you notice something, I am a registered voter. Elections are announced. If I cannot go and vote, I don't have a polling place nearby. I don't have an access to a polling place. The whole purpose of election is done. When we talk about accessibility to polling space, look at the efforts that Election Commission of India has made in recent times. Most of you don't know this. Let me tell you something very interesting. Imagine Gir's Sanctuary. Inside Gee's sanctuary, Election Commission of India has set up a polling booth. And interestingly, this polling booth is for one voter. Just one voter. Look at the efforts that Election Commission of India is making just to ensure that every registered voter has a place, has a polling booth, has a place where he can go and vote. Every vote counts. And as you're talking about elections, I have a small book recommendation. There's a wonderful book published by Election Commission of India called Leap of Faith. We have the second edition now. Do read that. I think every single civil service aspirant should read this book. The next standard that contributes to free and fair elections is called electoral safety. That is, the voter should feel safe going and voting. The voter should not be intimidated. They should not be afraid to go out of the house and vote. If a voter is afraid to come out of the house and vote, where is the election free then? This is the presence of coercion then. The biggest threat to electoral safety is polling violence. We have had cases where violence breaks out on the day of polling. And when the violence breaks out, people are afraid to go out of the homes and vote. The next standard that makes election free and fair is the voting should be fraud-free. In the very act of voting, a lot of frauds are committed. For example, ineligible voters may try to vote. You'll find unregistered voters sometimes voting. You may find a person voting multiple times. Now, all this is fraud, voting fraud. And the next important standard is we should prevent all this from happening. That's why, to ensure that these things don't take place, Election Commission of India has very interesting steps. You have poll observers. You have those purple ink. All of us, when we go and cast our vote, we get inked, right? Now, these are mechanisms by which we ensure that voting is fraud-free. Let's come down to standards after voting. After voting, the most important standard is the ballots have to be counted correctly. And the correct results have to be announced. And please remember, every single ballot that has been cast has to be counted. Let's come down to the last standard. And this standard happens to be, once the ballots are counted, once the results are announced, every single candidate, every single political party has to respect, the key word is respect the will of the people. That is, respect the results of the election. Because this allows a smooth transition in democracy. All the 8 standards of free and fair election reflect these ethical values. The first most important ethical value happens to be inclusivity. Inclusiveness. Democracy is all about inclusivity. Next is transparency. Third is honesty. The candidate should be honest about themselves. The voter should be honest in voting. Voters should not be manipulated. They should be honest in casting votes. And the last and the most important, non-partisan. We explored 8 standards that contribute to a free and fair election. And free and fair elections are the cornerstone of democracy. Even the smallest act that threatens the free and fair elections is a threat to not only to the electoral process, is a threat to democracy itself. I have a request here to all the eligible voters. Don't waste your vote. Make an informed choice. Be an enlightened citizen. That's all for now. Happy learning.